and welcome to Crimes Through Time, snapshots of crime history. Today we're diving into one of Victorian England's most chilling murder cases. This isn't just a story about poison. It's about greed, gambling, insurance fraud, and a doctor who turned his medical knowledge into a weapon. Our story begins in 1824 in the small market town of Rugeley, Staffordshire. William Palmer was born into what seemed like a respectable family. His father, Joseph, was a sawyer. He worked in a sawmill, and they lived comfortably enough. But when William was just 12 years old, his father died, leaving his mother, Sarah, with a massive inheritance of £70,000. That's over $7 million in today's money. This windfall would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. From the start, William showed troubling signs. Even with this respectable profession, he had the reputation of being a wild young man, with plenty of money to spend and with indulgent parents who never attempted to rule him. At 17, he was apprenticed to a Liverpool chemist, but was dismissed after just 3 months for stealing money. But William was clever, dangerously so. He persevered and qualified as a doctor at St Bartholomew's Hospital in 1846. However, even during his medical training, dark rumours followed him. When he was working at Stafford Infirmary, he met plumber and glazier George Abley at the Lamb and Flag pub in Little Haywood. William challenged him to a drinking competition, and George accepted. But an hour later he was carried home, where, later that night, he died. William was accused of poisoning him. The motive was believed by locals to be because William had taken an interest in George's wife. Nothing was proven, but the allegation was taken seriously enough by the hospital to impose tighter controls on its dispensary. In 1847, William returned to Rugeley and set up practice as the local doctor. He married Anne Thornton in St Nicholas Church, Abbots Bromley. She had been known as Anne Brooks because her mother had been the mistress of Colonel Brooks. Anne came with connections to money, and this would become a pattern in William's life. To the outside world, Dr. Palmer was charming and successful, but behind that charm lay something sinister. Anne's mother, also called Anne Thornton, came to stay with the newlyweds in January 1849. The elder Anne Thornton died on 18th of January 1849, 2 weeks after coming to stay with William. She was known to have lent him money. Dr. Bamford would record her cause of death as apoplexy, the rupture of her internal organs. She'd inherited £8,000 from Colonel Brooks after his suicide in 1834, and conveniently, much of that money found its way to William. William and Anne had 5 children. Their first son, William Brooks Palmer, was born in 1848 and would enjoy a long life, living until the 28th of April 1926. But the others died as infants, all from what was described as convulsions. Elizabeth Palmer died on the 6th of January 1851. She was about 2.5 months old at the time of her death. Henry Palmer died on the 6th of January 1852. About a month old. Frank Palmer died on the 19th of December 1852 at about 7 hours old. John Palmer died on the 27th of January 1854. He was 3 or 4 days old. As infant mortality was not uncommon at this time, these deaths were not initially seen as suspicious. Though after William's conviction in 1856, there was speculation that he had administered poison to the children to avoid the expense of more mouths to feed. By this point, William had developed a passion that would ultimately destroy him: horse racing. But he was a terrible gambler. By 1854, he was drowning in debt, borrowing money at extortionate rates of 60% interest, and forging his mother's signature to secure loans. He needed money fast. This is where William's medical knowledge became truly dangerous. He began taking out life insurance policies on people close to him, then ensuring they didn't live long enough to enjoy them. In 1854, he took out a massive £13,000 policy on his wife Anne with the Prince of Wales Insurance Company. equivalent to over 1.3 million today. The death of Anne Palmer occurred on the 29th of September 1854 at 27 years old. Her cause of death was recorded as cholera, as a cholera pandemic was affecting the United Kingdom, causing around 23,000 deaths across the country. Perfect cover. Who would suspect murder during a cholera outbreak? But William wasn't finished. He set his sights on his brother Walter, attempting to insure him for an astounding £84,000. When that proved impossible, he settled for £14,000, using the same insurance company that he'd insured Anne with. Walter was a drunk, and soon became reliant on his brother, who readily plied him with several bottles of gin and brandy a day. He died on the 16th of August 1855. By this time, the insurance company smelled a rat. They refused to pay out and suggested an investigation, sending investigators Simpson and Field. They concluded William had lied about the details on his insurance policy and refused to pay out. They also caught him trying to insure the life of George Bates, a farmer who was working for William, for £10,000. Simpson and Fields referred William to the police for investigation. To compound his financial woes, the housemaid with whom William had been enjoying an affair had just given birth to their son Alfred. The game was up, or so it seemed. William was getting desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. John Parsons Cook was everything William Palmer wasn't. Young, wealthy, lucky at the races. At 28, John had inherited £12,000 and spent his time gambling and racing horses. He was also William's friend. In November 1855, both men travelled to Shrewsbury Handicap Stakes. John won £3,000 by betting on Polestar. William lost heavily by betting instead on the chicken. That's the equivalent of John winning £300,000, while William lost a fortune. They went to celebrate at the Raven Inn, but something went wrong. John complained that his gin had been burning his throat. William responded by making a scene in which he attempted to convince bemused onlookers there was nothing untoward with John's glass. John was violently sick and told his friends George Herring and Ishmael Fisher something chilling. "I believe that Dan Palmer has been dosing me." But here's the strangest part of the case. Despite suspecting William of poisoning him, John still returned to Rugeley with his friend. John had deposited some of the money with Ishmael Fisher, expressing his belief that William had dosed him for the sake of the money. But did John sever all ties with his friend? Not in the slightest. The pair returned to Rugeley thick as thieves. John booked room 10 at the Talbot Arms, directly opposite William's house. William immediately took charge of his medical care. Over the next few days, John's condition worsened. William was constantly at his bedside, bringing him coffee, broth, medicine. Meanwhile, he was also secretly collecting John's winnings, claiming he was helping his sick friend. On the 20th of November, William made a critical purchase: 3 grains of strychnine from the surgery of Dr. Salt. He put the grains into 2 pills, which he then administered to John. What happened next was horrific. On the 21st of November, not long after William had administered the 2 laced ammonia pills, John died in agony at 1 a.m, screaming that he was suffocating. The chambermaid, Elizabeth Mills, later testified that as John was dying, he accused William of murder. John Cook was dead, and William Palmer had his money. But John's stepfather, William Stevens, wasn't buying the sudden death story. He demanded a post-mortem examination. And this is where William's medical knowledge both helped and hindered him. During the post-mortem, William was present as a colleague, not a suspect, but witnesses later testified that he was said to have tampered with a key piece of evidence, the contents of John's stomach, by bumping into one of the physicians as he was lifting out the stomach, causing the contents to spill. The remaining stomach contents was sent to Dr. Alfred Swain Taylor at Guy's Hospital in London, the leading toxicologist of the day. But here's the curious part. The results showed only a little, non-lethal amount of antimony, the active ingredient of a common medicine. But based on reported symptoms and circumstances before death, Taylor concluded that John had been poisoned by strychnine. No strychnine was found in the body, yet Dr. Taylor was convinced that John had been murdered with it. William's actions next could only be described as those of a guilty man. He paid the postmaster, Samuel Cheshire, to intercept letters to the coroner for him, a crime Samuel would later be convicted of and spend 2 years in prison for. And then he wrote to the coroner himself, requesting that the verdict of death be given as natural causes. He also enclosed a £10 note. The jury at the inquest delivered their verdict on the 15th of December. The deceased died of poisoning, willfully administered to him by William Palmer. William was arrested on charges of murder and forgery because investigators had also discovered he had been forging his mother's signature. He was detained at Stafford Jail, but he didn't go quietly, threatening to go on hunger strike if he was not released. He was informed by the governor that if he did, he would order him force-fed. The case was so notorious that an Act of Parliament, the Central Criminal Court Act of 1856, was passed to allow the trial to be held at the Old Bailey in London in front of Lord Chief Justice Campbell, as it was felt that a fair jury could not be found in Staffordshire, given the widespread reporting in the newspapers, especially about the suspected murder of the children. Though some believed it was more of a political move to ensure a guilty verdict, as William was too popular locally and might have been acquitted. The prosecution's case, led by Alexander Cockburn with John Walter Huddleston, was entirely circumstantial, but it was damning. Multiple witnesses testified that William had purchased strychnine from local chemists. Chemist Dr. Salt admitted selling him strychnine in the belief that he was using it to poison a dog. He also admitted he had failed to record the sale in his poisons book as required by law. William's financial situation was desperate. Bank manager Mr. Strawbridge confirmed that his bank balance had stood at £9 on the 3rd of November 1855. John's symptoms had matched strychnine poisoning. William's defence team, led by Sergeant William Shee, tried to put the new science of toxicology itself on trial. His lawyers showed that Taylor had no direct knowledge of the effects of strychnine on humans, having only observed the effects of strychnine on 10 rabbits in an experiment performed more than 20 years earlier. But it wasn't enough. After deliberating for just over an hour, the jury returned their verdict: guilty. Lord Campbell sentenced William Palmer to death, and according to witnesses, he showed no reaction whatsoever. George Smith carried out the public hanging of William Palmer on the 14th of June 1856 at Stafford Prison, in the presence of a crowd of around 30,000 spectators. Even at the gallows, William maintained some of his charm. As he stepped onto the scaffold, he reportedly looked at the trapdoor and exclaimed, "Are you sure it's safe?" His last words were haunting. "I am innocent of poisoning Cook by strychnine." But note his careful phrasing. He didn't say he was innocent of murder, just of using strychnine. William Palmer's case changed British law and forensic science forever. It was one of the first major trials to rely heavily on toxicology evidence, although no poison was actually found in the victim's body. The case was so notorious that some of the eminent burgesses of Rugeley petitioned the Prime Minister of the day to change the name of the town, because Rugeley would forever be associated with William Palmer, the Prince of Poisoners. The Prime Minister agreed, but only if he could name it after himself: Palmerston. The shocked burgesses declined the offer, so Rugeley remained Rugeley, but the name of William Palmer lived on in infamy. His wax figure stood in Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors for 127 years, and his story inspired countless books, films, and even influenced Arthur Conan Doyle. In the Sherlock Holmes story, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, when the villain is uncovered as a doctor, Watson cites William Palmer as an example in his discussion of the case with Holmes. But was William Palmer guilty? The evidence suggests he almost certainly was, not just of murdering John Cook, but potentially of killing up to 14 people, including his own wife, children and brother, all for money to feed his gambling addiction. But questions remain. The forensic evidence was weak by modern standards, and some scholars argue the conviction was based more on William's reputation than solid proof. Robert Graves even wrote a novel defending William Palmer, suggesting he might have been framed. But what we do know is this: William Palmer was a doctor who violated the most sacred trust of his profession. Whether he was guilty of one murder or many, his story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the person we trust most, the one even with the knowledge to heal us, might be the very person planning our downfall. So what do you think? Was William Palmer a serial killer who got away with multiple murders before finally being caught? Or was he a victim of Victorian prejudice and poor forensic science? Let me know. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and let me know what you think of this case in the comments below, and I look forward to welcoming you in the next one.